Hello and welcome to Church at Home with Rachael for Friday, the 6th of January. Today is Epiphany, and I'd like to speak to you about Epiphany for a moment today. Today is the day that we end the Christmas season. This is the day that we recognize as Christians. We recognize that the Magi, or the wise men, arrived at Jesus' home. Now, there's lots of people, and if you look at any nativity scenes, you'll recognize that lots of people assume, we tell the story as if, we sing the carols as if the Magi arrived at the manger, at the sheep cave or the barn or wherever it was that Jesus was born. And the truth is that the fact is that the story begins when Jesus is born, when the star lights up the sky and the Magi see it. And there's lots of questions as to who the Magi were. Zoroastrian priests or pastors or whatever their titles would be, sages. They could be wise men, people from they were men from the Orient. All we know is that they came from a long way away, following astronomy, not astrology, but astronomy, following the star, following the map of the sky, which is an incredibly interesting thing. I'll tell you a story about a church in Lunenburg in a minute. But they followed the star, and it led them to the place where Jesus was. And it probably took them about 2 years. And this is important because in the story, when we hear about, they go to Herod, they go first to the king to say, we've come into your place. Like, as a priest, I can't go into another priest's church and just do stuff. I have to go in and say, hey, I'm here. Would it be okay with you that I be here? Could I participate? Could I do something? So these priests, these wise men came into King Herod's realm, and they went to him first as appropriate and said, hey, we're here to pay our homage and bring gifts to the new king. You can just imagine how Herod must have been feeling. We already know he was a little bit off his rocker, but a little bit paranoid. But at the same time, think about it. You're the king. You're it. And now they're coming to say a baby is the king? Yeah. Not going to go over well. So Herod's not stupid. He tells them to go ahead and everything. But then he tells them, when you're done, come and tell me all about him. Come on back. So they go and they find him. And they give him the gifts of frankincense, myrrh, and gold. And each of those things, I don't have it in front of me, but each of those things actually refers in Scripture to different parts of Jesus' life and ministry. I'll find that out on another day. All these things that I should know as a priest, but I don't. My profs probably wouldn't be so. My seminary profs would probably be shaking their heads at me, but oh well. So they go and they present these gifts, and then they are told in a dream, don't go back the way you came. Don't go see Herod. So they follow the orders of the dream, and they leave by a different route to go back to their homes. We don't hear about them again. Well, the fact is that Herod wanted them to come back so that he would know who to go and eliminate. He would then know who to go and see. But he did find out that what they were looking for was a child who would be less than 2 years old. And so then we celebrate's the wrong word, I think, but we acknowledge what's called the Feast of the Holy Innocents on the 11th of January, I believe, when all of the children under the age of 2, at least all the boys anyway, were killed. Because Herod was trying to eliminate his competition, this one who would be king. He thought, if I just eliminate them all, if I have sort of toddler genocide, then I can take over. I don't have to worry about it. This didn't work because the wise men shared, and they weren't going to go home. And then Joseph and Mary were told in a vision that they should leave, and so they left. They left where they were, and they went to Egypt. And I spoke about this a couple weeks ago when I talked about Jesus as a refugee. Jesus as a 2-year-old with Mary, who would be maybe 15, 16 years old, and Joseph as a young father. He may not have been young in years, but he'd only been a father for 2 years, less than 2 years. And they have to leave everything they have behind, leave their family, uproot themselves, and go to a different country to avoid death. Think about it. If soldiers were coming to eliminate your child, would you let them? No, we wouldn't. we would fight tooth and nail to save our child, which means we would probably lose our lives as well. And so Mary and Joseph and Jesus, the toddler, left to go to Egypt, where they stayed for a while until they were told the time was safe and they could come back. This day, this end of Christmas, this last, when we celebrate the feast of the Epiphany, is a moment of aha, because it is not only is it that time that tells us about the early days of Jesus' life, that Christmas season when Christ, when God became one with us, Emmanuel, God with us. It also tells us that Jesus was not just coming for the Jews, for the Jewish peoples. These are Gentiles. These are people from a completely different culture, a completely different background, who showed up to pay homage to Jesus as their king. And this foreshadows in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, later on when Jesus starts having ministry for the Gentiles, the people who were not Jewish. And in a couple of the Gospels, that's a hard sell. It seems at the beginning that Jesus is really focusing on the Jewish peoples, and then he shifts, in some cases pretty abruptly, to recognizing or beginning to serve, to beginning to preach to and change the lives of people who were not Jewish by tradition. And that opens up a whole other world about what it is to be called to share the good news of Jesus Christ. There has been all kinds of really wonky theology thrown out in North American politics. And I am, for those Canadians who say, or people say, stick to your own, don't bring up the Americans. The Canadians are doing it too. We got some pretty odd, in my opinion, some odd stuff happening when it comes to how do we preach Jesus. And I think it's powerful. It's powerful to recognize that we aren't called to simply to share the good news with only people who already know the good news. We're called to share the good news in other ways. I'm trying to find here this came up earlier this week on my Facebook. It says, it's a quote from John Shelby Spong. Lots of people, an Anglican bishop that a lot of people didn't like. I had a chance to listen to him, actually the night that I got engaged to Rob, and I found him to be a very powerful speaker, a very faithful speaker. He had a lot to say. And he says here, my mission as a Christian is not to convert the heathen, as we once asserted. It is rather to assist in the task of helping all people to live fully, to love wastefully, and to be all that they are capable of being. Is that not what Jesus taught us? To live fully, to love wastefully, and to be all that they are capable of being. We are who we are because God created us this way. And if we are to live up to that, what God expects of us, then we are going to love, or we're going to be all that we are capable of being. And to love wastefully. What does that mean? If we waste something, we're throwing it out there. We're using it so much that it's overflowing. And let's love wastefully. And the fact is, the more that we love wastefully, the more we recognize there's no wasting in love. If we love people the way Jesus loved people, regardless of whether they were Jewish or Gentile or anything at all, then we are doing what we're called to do. And we are to assist in the task of helping all people. Is that not what Jesus did? Is that not what Jesus did? Is that not what the wise men who went to see him knew he was to do? To help, to assist in the task of helping all people to live fully, to love wastefully, and to be all that they are capable of being. When I read that was like an aha moment. And for me, that's an epiphany. That moment when we learn something new. Epiphany is that moment when we recognize, we celebrate that Jesus came for all the world, not just for the people who presumed he came for them. And these days it seems like we have a lot of people who are presuming that Jesus came for them, but they are forgetting that Jesus came for all. So as we move into this weekend and we move into the season of Epiphany, where we listen to the stories of Jesus' earthly life and we watch the miracles unfold and the teachings and the parables, I encourage you to look and see new ways that Jesus is living out his life in our midst, and the ways that we are called to live out Jesus' life for others in our midst, in the midst of the world that we are living in. This is an opportunity we have as we say goodbye to the Christmas season, where we reflect on who Jesus has been with us and in our hearts. And now this is our opportunity to be like the wise men, to take gifts to Jesus as we meet Jesus where he is, in the homeless, in the brokenhearted, in the hungry, in the elderly, in the weak, in the young, in the middle-aged, in the teenager, in the coworker, in the neighbor, the person on the bus, the person sitting on their phone while their child plays soccer. That's who we're called to reach out to. We're called to reach out to everybody, that we might, as we have experienced Emmanuel, God with us, we might share Emmanuel, God with them. Have a good weekend. I'll see you on Sunday for Gospel on the Go, and on Monday for Church at Home with Rachael. God bless you, and thanks for watching.